A German reconnaissance pilot banks low over the Egyptian desert on the morning of the 22nd of October, 1942. His camera shutter clicking at the long lines of vehicles strung out across the sand south of the El Alamein line. What he photographs looks, in every particular, like an ordinary transport column. Hundreds of soft-skinned lorries parked in orderly rows, waiting, as armies always wait, for orders that have not yet come. He flies home. The film is developed, and an intelligence officer somewhere behind German lines marks the position on a map and files it away as unremarkable. He has just looked directly at several hundred British tanks. He has no idea. In 11 days, those trucks will roll north under cover of darkness, shed their disguises, and help break the Axis line in North Africa for good. And the man responsible for making an entire armoured division vanish in plain sight was not a general, but a film set artist who, 18 months earlier, had been building sets for Alexander Korda in a London studio. To understand how several hundred tanks were hidden inside a lie that the enemy photographed, studied, and believed, you have to understand the position Bernard Montgomery found himself in that October. The Eighth Army was preparing to attack a fortified German-Italian line running from the coast at El Alamein, south to the impassable Katara Depression. 40 miles of minefields, wire, and dug-in guns, with no open flank to manoeuvre around. Rommel's Panzer Army Africa, though weakened by supply shortages, was still a formidable defensive force, and any hope of a breakthrough depended on one thing above all: surprise. Montgomery needed Rommel looking the wrong way, at the wrong time, in the wrong place. The trouble was that hiding an attack of this scale in open desert is, on the face of it, absurd. There is no forest to conceal an army in the western desert, no hedgerow, no folded ground worth the name. Freddie de Guingant, Montgomery's chief of staff, put the problem to the deception planners in terms that sounded almost like a joke. Conceal 150,000 men, 1,000 guns, and 1,000 tanks on a plain as flat and hard as a billiards table, and make sure the Germans know nothing about it, even though their aircraft would be photographing every inch of it, every single day. The man given this impossible brief was Lieutenant Colonel Dudley Clark, head of A-Force, the deception organization running Allied trickery across the Middle East. Clark had already built a reputation for elaborate theatrical fictions, phantom armies, invented divisions, entire notional invasion fleets that existed only on paper and in carefully planted rumour. But Operation Bertram, the tactical deception plan built for this specific battle, needed something more exacting than rumour. It needed physical objects that could survive close aerial photography, because the Luftwaffe was flying reconnaissance sorties over the assembly areas almost daily, and a deception that fell apart under a magnifying glass was worse than no deception at all. For the practical work of building a landscape of lies that could survive that scrutiny, responsibility fell to a camouflage unit under Lieutenant Colonel Geoffrey Barkas, a former documentary filmmaker, working with the artist Tony Ayrton and the illustrator Brian Robb, men whose peacetime skills lay in exactly the kind of visual illusion the desert now demanded. Barkas had already proved the basic principle worked. Earlier in the campaign, his unit had built a dummy railhead complete with fake rolling stock and a wooden station building, convincing enough that a German bomber crew apparently thought it worth attacking. Dropping according to one account passed down by those involved, a wooden bomb on it, in what looked almost like a joke, returned in kind. The lesson Barkas drew from episodes like that stuck with everyone who worked under him. In the desert, you cannot hide anything. The ground offers no cover. All you can do is disguise it as something else. Tanks become trucks overnight. Trucks become tanks. And the enemy, staring at photograph after photograph, is left guessing at your true strength and your true intentions, unable to trust his own evidence. The deception plan for the coming battle had two separate, interlocking aims, and both were being run at once. First, convince Rommel's staff that the main assault would fall in the south, near the Katara Depression, rather than in the north, where it would actually be launched. Second, convince them that whenever the attack came, it would not come until well into November, roughly 2 weeks after the real date already fixed for the 23rd of October. Getting either of these wrong risked the entire offensive. Getting both right meant Rommel's reserves would be looking in the wrong direction, and possibly not looking with any urgency at all, on the night the attack actually began. The Southern deception alone required building an entire notional army out of nothing. Barkas's teams constructed around 400 dummy Grant tanks and well over 1,000 fake transport vehicles and guns, fabricated largely from local materials. Calico stretched over wooden frames, palm frond hurdles bent into vehicle shapes, anything that would cast the right kind of shadow from 5,000 feet. A dummy water pipeline was laid, its trench dug in stages, its fake pipe assembled each night from stacked petrol cans and dismantled again before dawn, so that its rate of progress would appear to match a genuine engineering project. One that, according to the timetable the pipeline seemed to imply, would only be ready by early November. Fake supply dumps were built and deliberately allowed to grow day by day in full view of German air reconnaissance, mimicking the slow, patient build-up of an army getting ready to strike from the south. But the true masterstroke, the piece of the plan that would matter most on the night of the attack itself, was what happened to the real armour in the north. Concealing the presence of tanks was pointless. German reconnaissance already knew roughly how many armoured vehicles the Eighth Army possessed, and any attempt to make them disappear entirely from photographs would only invite suspicion. So Barkas's unit did something cleverer. They disguised the tanks as the one thing German intelligence had already grown used to seeing in vast numbers and paying no attention to: soft-skinned lorries. Each tank earmarked for the northern assault were fitted with a device called a Sunshield, a light, quickly detachable canopy of canvas stretched over a wood or tubular steel frame, built to sit over the vehicle's hull and turret, and from above present the unmistakable silhouette of an ordinary truck. The idea, according to Barkas himself, had originated with General Wavell, who had sketched a tank wearing a canopy on a scrap of paper months before and handed it to him almost as an aside. By October 1942, that sketch had become hardware, and it had become hardware at scale. Well over 700 Sunshield covers were issued to the Eighth Army in the weeks before the battle, enough to disguise the great majority of the armour destined to lead the assault. The same trick was played in reverse on the artillery. Field guns and their limbers, towed forward night after night into their firing positions, were fitted with a simple box-shaped canvas structure known as the cannibal, again cut and framed to mimic a lorry's profile. The gun's real wheels left visible beneath the canopy, so that even a careful observer, cross-checking wheel spacing against known truck types, would find nothing obviously wrong. Petrol was stacked in the shadows of existing trench revetments, out of direct sunlight where a reconnaissance camera could pick out its telltale rows of cans. Food supplies were piled in boxes and draped with camouflage netting, cut and shaped to resemble the load bed silhouette of parked lorries. Nothing about the northern build-up was hidden in the sense of being made invisible. It was hidden in the sense of being made boring, turned into exactly the kind of unremarkable transport clutter that a reconnaissance analyst, staring at his 100th identical photograph of the week, would glance at and move past. Timing made the whole scheme far harder than simply building the right disguises. Every one of those real combat-ready tanks had to be driven from its hidden assembly area at Martello, a patch of desert only some 12 miles by 8, up bulldozed approach tracks toward the front, and into its designated firing position. All in darkness, all without alerting the German listening posts and patrols who monitored the front line every single night. Even the bulldozed tracks that would carry them forward were a security risk in themselves. There was no realistic hope of hiding freshly cut vehicle tracks from aerial photography. So, Ayrton, who had gone up in an aircraft himself to study exactly what a German reconnaissance pilot would see, came up with a way to disguise their purpose instead of their existence. Rather than bulldozing a single continuous route from the rear straight to the front, an unmistakable signal of imminent attack, engineers were ordered to complete the track in disconnected patches, joining the sections together only in the final days before the assault, so that what German analysts saw for weeks was a scatter of unconnected desert scars, rather than one obvious approach road pointing straight at the line. On the night of the 22nd of October, with the attack now less than 24 hours away, the northern sector became a slow, silent choreography of vehicles moving under strict blackout discipline. The 1st Armoured Division, among other formations, shifted forward from its dispersal areas into positions from which it would launch the assault. Tanks that had spent days or weeks parked and disguised as trucks, now creeping toward the line, still wearing their sunshields, their crews working in darkness to strip the canvas away only once they had reached their final firing points, so that a chance reconnaissance flight at dawn would still see nothing but the same tired transport columns it had photographed the day before. Every vehicle move, every gun emplacement, every ammunition dump had to arrive exactly on schedule and exactly out of sight, because a single daylight photograph of a sunshield half removed or a tank caught mid-transformation could unravel weeks of careful work in an instant. It very nearly did unravel, not through any failure of the disguise, but through a piece of luck that had nothing to do with camouflage at all. Rommel himself was not even in North Africa when the battle began. Exhausted and in poor health, he had returned to Germany on sick leave in September, leaving Panzer Army Africa under the temporary command of General Georg Stumme. It was Stumme, not Rommel, who was staring at the aerial photographs of trucks parked in their hundreds behind the northern sector of the line in the days before the attack. And it was Stumme's staff, not Rommel's, who had to weigh the fragmentary, contradictory picture, the deception plan, had spent weeks constructing. Whether the ruse alone would have held against Rommel's sharper eye is one of the genuine, unresolved questions of the operation. A question the historical record cannot fully answer, because by the time Rommel realized the scale of what was happening and flew back to take command, the real attack had already begun, and the moment for stopping it at the border had already passed. At 9:30 on the night of the 23rd of October, more than 800 British guns opened fire along the northern sector, in a barrage that 8th Army veterans would describe for the rest of their lives as a wall of noise and light, unlike anything they had witnessed before. Operation Lightfoot, the infantry assault that Bertram's deception had been built to protect, went in behind it. And in the confusion of that first night and the days of brutal, grinding fighting that followed, fighting through minefields the British called the Devil's Gardens, fighting that would run on for nearly 2 weeks before the line finally broke. The tanks that German intelligence had spent weeks photographing as parked lorries began, section by section, division by division, to shed their canvas skins and move. By the time Panzer Army Africa's shattered remnants began their long retreat west toward Tunisia in early November, the illusion had done exactly what it was built to do. The main weight of the attack had fallen in the north, precisely where German dispositions were weakest, precisely because German reserves had spent the preceding weeks oriented toward a southern threat that existed only in canvas, calico, and carefully staged petrol cans. None of this appeared in any dispatch as headline news, and that in itself tells you something about how deception work is judged. A camouflage scheme that succeeds leaves almost no trace of its own success. No wrecked equipment, no captured position, nothing for a war correspondent to photograph. Its only evidence is an absence. The absence of German reserves where they were needed, the absence of a spoiling attack that never came, the absence of a defence properly weighted against the blow that actually fell. Geoffrey Barkas, Tony Ayrton, and the small, resourceful unit of artists, illustrators, and engineers who built 400 fake tanks out of local scrap and turned 700 real ones into invisible lorries, never received the public recognition that fell on the armoured divisions they had helped set loose. What they did receive, eventually, was the quieter acknowledgement of the historians and staff officers who went back through the campaign afterward and concluded that Bertram had worked more completely than almost anyone involved had dared hope at the time, that Rommel's forces really had been looking the wrong way, at the wrong strength, on the night it mattered most. The wider legacy reached further than North Africa. The lessons drawn from the Western Desert's camouflage and deception units. The principle that in open terrain you cannot hide an object, only disguise it as something else. The discipline of building a deception that could survive not just a glance, but close, repeated photographic scrutiny. The understanding that timing and choreography mattered as much as the physical trickery itself, fed directly into the planning of far larger deception schemes later in the war, including the vast fictional armies conjured up ahead of the Normandy landings under Operation Fortitude. The men who had learned to turn a Grant tank into a 3-ton lorry with a few yards of canvas and a wooden frame had, in effect, written an early chapter in the playbook that would later help convince the German High Command that the real invasion of Europe was coming somewhere it was not. What stayed with the crews who drove those disguised tanks forward on the night of the 23rd of October was something more immediate than any of that legacy. Men who had spent days sitting inside a machine built for killing, dressed up to look like nothing more than a supply lorry, waiting for darkness and an order to strip the canvas away, remembered the strange, exposed feeling of trusting an idea rather than armor plate to keep them alive. It worked because a great many people, engineers driving bulldozers in staggered, deliberately incomplete patches, artists stretching calico over tubular frames in the heat, staff officers building a fake pipeline that crept forward at exactly the wrong pace to hint at exactly the wrong date. All did their small, unglamorous part of a single lie precisely enough, and for long enough that an enemy staring directly at several hundred tanks looked straight through them and saw nothing worth worrying about at all. By the time Rommel returned to take command of the battle already being lost, the trucks he had been shown in photograph after photograph for weeks had already told him everything he needed to know about where the blow was coming from. He had simply never had a reason to doubt them.